Hi, my name is John Brink. Thank you for joining us. You're watching a history of the BC forest industry. Thank you for watching our show today. My name is John Brink. My guest today is Jim Burbee. Jim is a registered professional forester, an RPF, and has spent 45 years in the northern interior, and especially with a focus on forestry. Jim, welcome to the show. And you have been in the working in the forest industry really already for close to 45 years. Tell us a little bit about where were you born and where did you get your education?
Thank you, John. I was born in the Peace River country, just outside of Dawson Creek on a family farm. And after graduating high school, I worked around a bit, but I ended up at the University of British Columbia, where I went to the forestry program there and graduated in 1973.
Right. And the forestry program is being trained in forest management and all elements relating to that. It's a fairly extensive course. It's about 5 years.
It was 5 years when I went. It's 4 years now. But there are disciplines you need to choose. You can't be an expert in everything.
Right.
My specialty was forest engineering. And it was 1 year in science, 4 years in forestry.
Wow. And then from there you went to northern BC to work?
Well, I worked off and on during my education because students have to pay their own way.
Right.
And I ended up in Prince George in 1966 looking for a job. I got a job with Northwood, working as a chokerman out of Newlands Camp, which is out by Eaglet Lake, east of town here.
Yeah.
And word got through to the main office. I guess they had a forestry student working in the bush, so they offered me a summer job, and that sort of led to summer jobs all through my forestry career, working in the Prince George area here.
So you spent pretty much all of your career in the region northern British Columbia, and likely worked pretty much your whole career for the Northwood Noranda organization.
Well, there's two phases. Northwood was a very new company, just starting up, the big boom in the 60s with the pulp mills and all that. So growing company, I didn't have to leave town to get a job promotion. I did lots of things within Northwood. I've lived in the same house for 45 years.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
I retired when Canfor amalgamated with Northwood, and I've been consulting for the last 20 years. So 2 careers really.
Right. Now looking back a bit, Jim, is that the Forest Act was established in 1912 or somewhere in that area, and then a lot of smaller mills started operating in the region around the Prince George area, mainly in the bush. The number is as many as 500 to 600 mills. Tell us a little bit about that part of history.
Well, not quite that old, but when I arrived here in 73, and even in the summer programs that I worked at beforehand, the signs of that era were definitely there. There were the horse barns, the cook shacks that were collapsed by snow. There was the plank roads. The logging would happen in the wintertime, and the mill would run in the summer, and the plank roads were built out of balsam, which was a species they didn't utilize except for road building.
Right.
Cut the lumber, take it to rail side, and it would go to the planer mills down on Planer Row and River Road in Prince George here.
So the smaller sawmills were out in the bush in the region. Then they took the rough lumber and they hauled it then to the railroad side, which is now River Road, but was then Planer Road, where it would be planed by usually a different company, and then they loaded it all in boxcars to be exported.
Yeah, basically that was the system. Yeah, and I wasn't here then, but all those signs were out there. We saw the horse logging, we saw the other logging patterns as we were, implementing our more modern plans, I guess.
Right. And what was the transition period? How come that kind of disappeared and people started to build mills and sawmills in town?
Well, when I came, all the small sawmills and their intermediate-sized small mills. A lot of them had been purchased by major firms that were trying to gain a lot of timber to support pulp mills.
Right.
That was the new industry. It was causing the boom. And so we went from probably 600 mills to, at that point in time, maybe 20 or 30.
Right.
It's a lot fewer now. It's probably 5 or 6.
Right.
In the vicinity of the town here.
Yeah. And then the next transition that took place, there was a Royal Commission hearing, I believe a couple of those, the Sloan Commission hearings, that changed direction of forest policy in British Columbia.
So absolutely. I think the Forest Act was established in 1912. The railway arrived in Prince George in 1914. So we've been a big part of the forest policy since its inception.
Right.
And when the Forest Act came in, it was basically to set up timber sales, to sell timber on the stump. And it was almost like staking a claim for gold.
Right.
You wanted a piece of timber,
right.
Took it to the government office, they put it up for sale, everybody bid on it. And if you got it, that's where you set up.
There was
that lasted probably until after the first Sloan Commission in '45.
Right.
Then the idea of public sustained yield units came into being so that you weren't overcutting in given units. But there was no real forestry programs behind that. It was assumed that the natural forest was still growing faster than you were cutting it.
Right.
And so there was no thought of even a reforestation program in those days.
So when did that become part of it, that forestry program or reforestation programs, that we have a renewable resource? When did that all kind of came into place?
Well, the main thinking came after the second Sloan report, which I think was 1955. And out of that came tree farm licenses in 56, 57, and area-based tenures, and some management responsibilities. Right. The actual active management of forests was quite a bit later.
Right.
Those were still largely cutting programs without big plant. We didn't have nurseries. So it was natural regeneration attempts, a lot of them not that successful.
Right.
And I think it was probably 1979 or so, it became the responsibility of the companies to reforest their own cut blocks.
And that was another major change to forest policy.
Yeah, I mean, it was the government responsibility. They sold the timber. It was their responsibility to do reforestation. They never had the budget. They didn't have the nurseries.
No.
And we were just falling behind. By 1984, I think it was, there was a big push on identifying all these areas. So NSR is non-sufficiently restocked area. In the interior, we had 750,000 hectares of NSR.
Of not sufficiently restocked areas.
Yes.
And so do we still have that today?
Well, no, actually what happened is we couldn't keep up with our nurseries, for one thing. I think the government was producing about 60 million seedlings. So the nursery business was privatized, and within 2 years we were producing over 250 million seedlings. And by the year 2000, we had taken care of the backlog. It took a lot of money. There were support programs, like the FERDA programs from the federal government, for example, to subsidize that. But we sort of caught up our backlog.
Right.
In that time period.
And companies more manage the land base, and obviously people like yourself as registered professional foresters were very much in demand to make sure that all was properly managed.
Well, the big change came there in 1987 was the fundamental change to how business was done.
Right.
And at that point, the silviculture regulation came into play, where if companies could not cut a stick of wood until they had a plan on how to reforest it. So they're called pre-harvest silviculture prescriptions. So they became a requirement. They were a plan to reforest the cut areas, and they needed to be signed and sealed by a professional forester.
And now we are growing more trees than we cut, really. Are we expanding? Not considering pine beetle and all the other things that have reduced it, but in terms of the scenario would be under that particular management style that we grow more timber than we harvest. So we have a sustainable yield curve that would be, if all things were normal, that would not be interrupted?
Well, the forest is a pretty complex
Yeah.
thing, so we can't really simplify it that much. But
Right.
what happened then was it was a paradigm shift,
Right.
right? That there was forestry being practiced on every acre that was cut.
Right.
There were acres back then, not hectares.
Right.
And then in parallel with that came in the biogenetic classification systems.
Right.
And that was brought in by Dr. Vladimir Krajina, who was part of the Sopron University that transplanted itself from Hungary to UBC during the Hungarian Revolution in the 1950s. And he developed this classification system which really gave us a good science base to deploy all of this planting out onto the land base. So we had direct responsibilities, we had a good science base for doing it, and and that was the starting years, mind you. But from there, it's really grown. The science has grown. We've improved our management. We've improved our knowledge. We've developed tree improvement programs. So we're using seed that's grown in commercial tree seed orchards.
Right.
Just like an apple orchard.
Right.
They grow the seeds. We're getting 25 to 30% more productivity out of those seeds than natural forests.
Unbelievable. And all of that is happening now as we speak.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and then, Jim, more getting to the current situation, we had a lot of what has happened recently, a lot more shuts, temporary shuts relating to market conditions, but also closures relating to the after effect of the pine beetle, the spruce beetle, forest fires where the annual allowable cut likely will go down from a high during the uplift period to about 50% of where it used to be, and that means we have too much capacity, not enough timber. How do you see that now? Will there be more downsizing, more adjustment, and will the industry change?
Well, I'm pretty sure that we'll see more downsizing. I mean, there's good forecasting around that and what's happening to the timber supply and what sort of mills can be sustained. And there'll be a period of recovery, and that period is probably 30 to 40 years. Like, we have 40 years of plantations since that 1987 silviculture rule.
Yeah.
Some of those are getting to be fairly advanced. I know that Canfor, for example, is doing some commercial thinning in those, just trials.
On their TFLs in particular?
Not in the TFLs, no, in the public sustained units,
good.
yes.
Yeah.
And but we're toying with that. For those forests to become sort of at their peak, like the point at which they've put on the most growth per year,
Right.
It'll be another 30, 40 years. So we're going to have a downsizing period here for 3-4 decades.
Yeah.
But our resource is the land base.
Yeah.
And we didn't lose that.
No.
Well, we've lost some of it to other interests and other environmental requirements, I guess.
Right.
Which is fine. That's a social decision. But
Right.
the land base that we keep, we're going to do more with it.
Yeah.
And so we'll produce more. And I also think that industry is going to have to adjust to different timber. You're not going to have the big old growth. You're going to have smaller trees.
Right.
And engineered wood is, an obvious outcome.
Right. In the global warming playing a role in all of that as well, because now we see not only beetle attack here of wood, but we also see that in Europe, in Sweden, and in other places.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the major pine beetle outbreak for sure was triggered by, climate change.
Yeah.
And the fires. So we have three things that make the natural disturbances. We've got the loggers, and we've got the fire, and we've got the insects and disease. Yeah. And those two are really driven by climate change. Yeah. And so the other party, the loggers, are suffering.
Yeah, and we have to adjust to all of that in a changing industry, which includes forestry as well. And as you indicated, we are likely living in one of the best areas for growing timber in the world, and especially in British Columbia.
Oh yeah, we have a tremendous land resource. here. And we're also, the forest research community is dealing with climate change as best they can. They have an assisted migration program. So they're moving tree species and individual populations within tree species further north and further up the mountainside. So they're trying to stay within the climate zones, the appropriate climate zones as the climate changes. So that's all part of the Forest Genetics Council's strategy for forests in BC.
Yeah, and then as we look forward in terms of you know, the sizes of timber that we harvest likely will be smaller than they were before. That means manufacturing will change and the products that we manufacture will be different.
Yeah, absolutely. We will grow smaller timber. We will grow it closer together. So your actual volume per hectare is going to increase significantly, both from stocking, because you have more trees on the hectare, and from the genetic gain that you get from the seed orchards. So you'll get more timber, but it'll be smaller.
Also in terms of harvesting, at one point I remember in the times that I've been in the industry, logging would go on 6 months of the year. Or as soon as it became winter, then you'd be logging with power saws and people have camps in the bush. Now it appears like the logging season is much shorter and much more mechanized. How do you see all of that you know, over the past and in the future?
Well, yeah, everything it's mechanized pretty much now. Hand fallers are pretty much a thing of the past. Like right now, it's really tough. I mean, with the cut going down, the logging seasons are shortening and shortening and shortening to prime seasons. It's really tough for people that own equipment to park it for 6 months of the year.
Yeah.
We need to find ways to get them involved in things like commercial thinning in the summertime, and
Yeah.
you know, keep the employment rolling. Maybe not 12 months, but let's get
More
back
continuity.
let's get back to something more common, like 9 or 10 months at least.
So the other thing that we notice now is that harvesting out of the bush, at one point it was always all tree length. Now it seems to be more cut to length and pre-processed. Is that the direction also, you know, where a lot of the residuals will stay in the bush?
Well, I don't know if it's going to stay in the bush, but definitely computerized bucking, mechanized bucking, it's been here for a while. It's here to stay. But you'll be sorting out those residuals. There's legislation coming right down as of today even to better utilize residues for things like bioenergy.
Yeah.
And with engineered wood products on the horizon, that smaller material, like knots and everything, that's going to be good fiber.
Yeah. So if we kind of look now forward, because there are lots of questions by the general public about, is there a future in the industry by people that are thinking careers, you know, is there a future, will it continue, and especially during difficult times where there are a lot of closures, you know, is your view looking forward from all the experience that you have, although the industry will be different, you still see a substantial future in the forest industry for British Columbia and the interior of the province?
Well, absolutely. People are innovative, companies are innovative. We have a big land base, we're going to have lots of wood, and there'll be an industry. Like, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but it's a resource and people will use it. That's the nature of business, that's the nature of people.
Yeah, and making just dimension lumber, we have to add more, create more products for new markets, and especially in areas, you know, that we hear there are concerns about. Do we have the skill sets? Because you can have the timber, you can have the location in the market, but if you do not have the trained workforce, then that will become also a challenge. How do you see that in terms of how do we get the skill sets?
Well, they'll have to evolve. We don't know the skill sets we need right now, but the industry will diversify. Just to survive, it has to diversify. It can't be a dimension lumber business anymore. There might be some of that, but there's going to be lots of engineered wood and other products, secondary products, and there'll be, you know, that'll be a more technical industry in the end. I think if we get people into wood engineering and whatnot, like those fields, into manufacturing as a career, right through university, etc., that will have those skills. I mean, people are doing amazing things with computers these days, and I've no concerns that we'll be able to develop the technology to keep up to the business. It's just a question of the skill that the industry has in developing that diversity and marketing that diversity.
Yeah. So with the land base that we have now, the working forest land base, then there is no question from what I've heard you say that since the changes that took place in it's an evolving industry really, and has been for the 45, 50 years that you've been involved, that the industry will look different. It is evolving, and it will become more adapted to challenges that it has, either in terms of managing the forest and attracting capital for different manufacturing techniques, and likely will involve more technicians and more computerized systems.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's how business runs these days.
Yeah.
And so there'll be more technology involved. What those new products are, they might not even be construction material. Like, we don't know what they are, right?
Right.
It's out there for those young, brilliant minds to figure out.
Yeah, and then if you kind of look a little bit broader than just the interior, what we have here is the coast is distinctly different, because it is where in the interior we have mainly spruce, balsam fir, and then pine, and then down the coast we got cedar, Douglas fir, but it's also a changing industry down the coast. How do you see that?
Well, I think that, again, that's diversity, and diversity is good. It's diversity in the forest base. It's diversity in markets. I think that's good. Personally, I have very little experience on the coast.
Yeah.
I've always been an interior forester.
Yeah.
But those are high-value species,
Yeah.
and they have gotten into especially the Douglas fir and some of the construction fields. It's been very popular. It's strong, straight-grained. Cedar, decorative. There's all these marketing potential there for expanding that piece, even though they're losing more of their land base to conservation. But at the same point, they can make some really high-value products out of what they have.
Yeah, indeed. And the other evolution that I always kind of think of in the mid-90s, we as an industry collectively came to the conclusion that we must use more wood in structures. And because one of the things that we did not do well, although we want as an industry to the global markets, to find new customers for our products, if we brought them here and they came off the airplane and they would look around and they say, well, where's all the wood? and so the Woodworks initiative, kind of focused on engineering and architects, to in particular focus on connections and how can we put more wood into structures. And we see now over the whole province and throughout Canada, actually, the Woodworks initiative, is using much more of their abilities to create a market for our own products in structures like the airports, and wherever you see it, you see more use of wood. And some of the evolutions that we have seen is cross-laminated timber, CLT, that is being used. And we have a building downtown, actually, that was one of the first. All of that, is very positive, right?
Oh yes, I absolutely believe that. I think that we're going to see some really innovative ideas come forward for uses of engineered wood in probably in applications that we haven't even thought of.
Yeah, yeah. And then always the thing that really stands out in my discussions with you is that what we did when we made some major changes that had an effect on the yield that we get on a per acre, per hectare, is the involvement of Vladimir Kania from Hungary, where they have either a university or a facility or a study environment, that focuses in particular on areas that are unique to forestry, and we brought that over from there into UBC and are using that technique today.
Well, what we brought over wasn't really what we're using. What we brought over was some really people that were arrived at the right place at the right time.
Right.
And they have it's a 200-year-old school. They have so much historical knowledge and around forest management systems. It was implanted to basically, almost like a frontier forest management system.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was that resource that sort of worked its way into the foundation for a very stable and scientifically based forest management approach in BC. So that group of 250 people that came over here during the Hungarian Revolution made a huge, huge contribution by bringing that knowledge bank with them, and then engaging not only in the academic circles, but reaching out to government and supporting systems that could be implemented in the province.
And we have to do more of that in manufacturing, and it opens the door again to become a global industry where we are looking at new products for new markets and new techniques. Jim, I appreciate you being my guest this session. It gave me a lot more information, and hopefully our listening public as well. And I thank you for listening to today to our guest, Jim Burbee, and thank you very much for watching our program.